Masyaf, Syria, August 4th, 2018, 11:45 p.m. Dr. Aziz Asbar left his home for a short drive through the quiet streets of Masyaf, a city in Syria's Hama province that most of the world had never heard of. His driver started the engine of the unarmored sedan. No security convoy followed them, no bodyguards flanked the vehicle, nothing to suggest this was one of the most important weapons scientists in the Middle East. Just a man going to work on a Saturday night at the facility where he was building missiles capable of striking anywhere in Israel. The car pulled onto the road. 20 seconds later, it exploded in a massive fireball that lit up the night sky. The blast completely destroyed the vehicle and killed both men instantly. Windows shattered in nearby buildings. Residents rushed outside to see flames consuming the wreckage. Within minutes, Syrian security forces sealed off the area, but it was already too late. The man who'd spent the last 7 years coordinating Syria's most sensitive weapons development programs was dead. Aziz Asbar had 2 PhDs from French universities, direct access to President Bashar al-Assad's palace in Damascus, and a working relationship with Major General Qassem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force. He ran Sector 4, the most classified unit inside Syria's Scientific Studies and Research Center, converting heavy Syrian rockets into precision-guided missiles using Iranian technology. He was building an underground weapons factory designed to be invulnerable to airstrikes. And according to Israeli intelligence, he was on the verge of creating a missile production capability that would fundamentally alter the strategic balance in the Middle East. Within hours of the explosion, a Syrian rebel group called the Abu Amara Brigades claimed responsibility via telegram, stating they'd planted explosive devices under Asbar's car. But almost immediately, Syrian state media and intelligence sources pointed it one a bit elsewhere. To Mossad, Israel's legendary intelligence service, to a targeted assassination that fit the pattern of at least 3 similar operations against enemy weapons engineers in the previous 3 years, to the latest strike in an invisible war over weapons proliferation that's been waged in the shadows for decades. Israel declined to comment, as always. The rebel group insisted it was their operation, and Aziz Asbar's body was prepared for a full military funeral befitting a national hero who'd devoted his life to Syria's weapons programs. But the truth about what happened that night in Masyaf reveals something far more complex than a simple car bombing. It reveals the machinery of modern covert warfare, where scientists are targeted as aggressively as soldiers, where plausible deniability is built into every operation, and where the moral calculations about who deserves to die get made in intelligence headquarters thousands of miles from the kill zone. Before we dive into how this operation actually worked and what it means for the shadow war over Middle East weapons, I want to tell you about this channel. Every single day, I bring you real intelligence operations from the covert wars that shaped our world. Not Hollywood spy fiction, but actual tradecraft, genuine operations, and the real human cost of decisions made in the shadows. These are the stories governments don't want told, the missions that never made headlines, and the operations that changed history without anyone knowing. If you're fascinated by espionage, covert operations, and the real mechanics of how intelligence agencies operate, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear about the systematic campaign to eliminate Syria's weapons scientists is just the beginning. The techniques, the coordination with foreign powers, and the moral questions raised by these targeted killings reveal everything about how modern shadow wars are actually fought. And real quick before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. Drop a comment below with your city and country. Are you listening from Tel Aviv, Damascus, Washington, or somewhere completely unexpected? It's always amazing to see how these spy stories reach people across the globe. Let me know. Now back to Syria, back to the scientist who was building weapons designed to change the Middle East forever. To understand why Aziz Asbar's death mattered enough to risk an assassination operation inside Syria, you need to understand what he was actually building. And that means understanding the difference between the rockets Hamas fires from Gaza and the precision-guided missiles Hezbollah used against Israel in 2006, because that difference is everything. Hamas fires thousands of unguided rockets that are essentially flying bombs with no steering mechanism. They launch them in the general direction of Israeli cities and hope they hit something. Israel's Iron Dome intercepts most of them, and the ones that get through usually land in empty fields. They're psychologically terrifying and occasionally deadly, but they're not strategically decisive. They can't win a war. Precision-guided missiles are different. They have GPS guidance, inertial navigation systems, and terminal guidance that lets them hit specific buildings from dozens or hundreds of miles away. During the 2006 Lebanon War, Hezbollah fired an Iranian-supplied C-802 anti-ship missile that nearly sank an Israeli corvette off the coast of Beirut. That wasn't luck. That was precision. And that's what keeps Israeli military planners awake at night. Aziz Asbar was working to give Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah that precision capability on a massive scale. He was taking Syria's existing arsenal of heavy rockets, the SM-600 Tishreen, which were based on Iran's Fateh 110 missile, and retrofitting them with advanced guidance systems. The unguided versions had a range of about 80 miles and an accuracy measured in kilometers. The guided versions could hit targets 130 to 186 miles away with accuracy measured in meters. Every military headquarters, every power plant, every airport, every strategic target in Israel would be vulnerable. And he wasn't just building a few prototypes, he was establishing production capability, underground facilities that couldn't be destroyed by airstrikes, manufacturing lines that could produce dozens or hundreds of precision missiles, supply chains that would funnel Iranian guidance components and Syrian rocket motors together into weapons that would be stored in Hezbollah's arsenals in Lebanon, ready to rain down on Israeli cities in the next war. Asbar had spent his entire adult life preparing for this role. Born in Syria, he'd earned 2 PhDs in France, specializing in atomic physics and liquid rocket fuel. He returned to Syria and joined the Scientific Studies and Research Center, known by its French acronym SIRS, or more commonly as SSRC, the state institution responsible for Syria's weapons programs. He rose through the ranks based on brilliance and loyalty to the regime, eventually becoming director of Institute 4000, the facility in Masyaf that handled the most sensitive missile development work. By 2018, Asbar held a position of extraordinary trust and access. He had free entry to Assad's presidential palace in Damascus, where he briefed Syria's leadership on weapons development progress. He coordinated directly with Major General Qassem Soleimani and other Iranian Quds Force officers who were funding and supplying much of the technology. He liaised with Hezbollah's weapons acquisition teams, who would eventually receive the missiles his facilities produced. He was the linchpin connecting 3 different organizations, 3 different intelligence services, and 3 different strategic interests, all focused on building a weapons capability that could threaten Israel's existence. Syrian state media would later call him a patriot scientist. Iranian outlets described him as a key factor in the resistance front's missile capabilities. Hezbollah-affiliated newspapers praised his devotion to the cause, but Western intelligence agencies had a different description. They called him one of Syria's most dangerous weapons engineers, and a legitimate military target whose elimination was worth significant operational risk. The facility Asbar commanded, the Syrian Scientific Studies and Research Center in Masyaf, had been on Israel's target list for years. Israeli jets had bombed it in September 2017, causing severe damage to what was believed to be a missile factory. They'd hit it again in December 2017. They'd struck it yet again in July 2018, just 2 weeks before Asbar's death. Each strike destroyed buildings, killed personnel, and set back production timelines. But each time Asbar rebuilt, new facilities went up, often underground where they couldn't be seen from satellites or hit by bombs. New personnel were recruited and trained. New production lines were established. And that created a problem for Israeli intelligence. You can bomb a facility, but facilities can be rebuilt. You can destroy weapon stockpiles, but new weapons can be produced. The only way to fundamentally disrupt a weapons program is to eliminate the irreplaceable human expertise that makes it work. The scientists who understand the technology, the engineers who've spent decades mastering the manufacturing process, the coordinators who maintain relationships between different organizations and keep supplies flowing. People like Aziz Asbar can't be replaced overnight. His combination of technical knowledge, institutional memory, personal relationships with Iranian and Hezbollah leaders, and trusted position within Assad's inner circle had taken decades to build. Kill him, and you create a vacuum that might take years to fill. Kill him, and you send a message to every other scientist working on enemy weapons programs. The regime can't protect you. Your expertise won't save you. No facility is secure enough, and no position is prestigious enough to keep you safe. But targeting scientists raises questions that targeting soldiers doesn't. Asbar wore a Syrian military uniform with the rank of brigadier general, but he wasn't a battlefield commander. He directed research and development, he supervised engineers and coordinated logistics. His weapons would kill people, certainly, but he himself never fired a shot. Does that make him a legitimate target under international law? Does it make his killing morally justified? Different people have different answers, and the debate gets complicated fast. What's not debatable is that by August 2018, someone had decided Aziz Asbar's work had to be stopped, and the only permanent way to stop it was to kill him. The answer came from a facility whose name sounds deceptively mundane: Centre d'études et de recherche scientifique, Center for Scientific Studies and Research. In French, it sounds almost academic. In reality, the Syrian Scientific Studies and Research Center was the beating heart of Assad's weapons programs and the most sanctioned research institution in Syria. SSRC was established in 1969 under President Nuruddin al-Atassi, following a presidential directive to advance Syria's scientific capabilities. The first director was Abdullah Watiq Shahid, a nuclear physicist who'd served as Minister of Higher Education. On paper, SSRC was a civilian agency dedicated to promoting research and development for Syria's economic and social development. In practice, from the very beginning, its mission was weapons development. By 1973, President Hafez al-Assad formally authorized direct relations between SSRC and the Syrian military. The center became the primary agency for developing and enhancing weapons for the armed forces. It maintained the facade of civilian research, but everyone knew its real purpose. The military chief of staff appointed members of SSRC's board and technical staff. Officers supervised production, and the SSRC Director General was elevated to ministerial rank, reporting directly to Syria's highest levels of power. The center was divided into multiple institutes spread across Syria. Institute 1000 and Institute 3000 in Jamraya, just outside Damascus, where some of Syria's most sensitive weapons work happened. Institute 2000 in Barzeh, another Damascus suburb, and Institute 4000 in Masyaf, in the mountains of Hama province, where Aziz Asbar built his missiles. Institute 4000 wasn't just one building. It was a sprawling complex with facilities at multiple locations around Masyaf. Sites at Al-Sheikh Gadban, Wadi Jahannam, Talaiya al-Ba'ath, and Dar Rama Ahmad. Some were visible from satellites, others were built underground or inside mountain tunnels where overhead imagery couldn't see them. The complex included research labs, production facilities, storage bunkers, and testing ranges. It employed hundreds of scientists, engineers, and technicians, all working on Syria's missile programs. But SSRC's reputation wasn't built on missiles. It was built on chemical weapons. Throughout the 1980s, with Soviet and Czechoslovakian assistance, SSRC developed Syria's chemical weapons arsenal: sarin nerve gas, VX nerve agent, mustard gas. Production facilities were established near Damascus, Hama, Homs, Aleppo, and Latakia, often disguised as civilian factories. By the 1990s, Syria possessed one of the largest chemical weapons stockpiles in the world, all developed and manufactured under SSRC's supervision. Then came the Syrian civil war in 2011, and Assad's regime found new uses for chemical weapons, not against foreign armies, but against Syrian civilians who dared to rebel. Doctors in opposition-held territories began reporting patients with symptoms of nerve agent exposure. Chemical attacks escalated in frequency and severity. The worst came on August 21, 2013, when Syrian forces launched rockets loaded with sarin into the Damascus suburb of Ghouta. Over 1,400 people died, many of them children who suffocated in their sleep as the nerve agent paralyzed their respiratory systems. The international outcry was immediate. President Obama had declared chemical weapons use a red line. Russia brokered a deal. Syria would surrender its chemical arsenal to international inspectors and join the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Assad agreed. Over the next year, OPCW inspectors oversaw the removal and destruction of 1,200 tons of chemical weapons and precursor chemicals. In January 2016, the OPCW confirmed that Syria's declared chemical weapons stockpile had been destroyed, but the attacks continued. April 2017, Khan Sheikhoun in Idlib province. A Syrian jet dropped bombs containing sarin on a residential area. Over 100 people died. When investigators analyzed samples from the attack site, they found the chemical signatures of SSRC-produced sarin, including specific compounds called hexamine and DIMP that served as fingerprints, proving the nerve agent came from Syria's original stockpile. The regime had lied about destroying everything. SSRC had hidden supplies and continued producing chemical weapons throughout the supposed disarmament. That April attack triggered American cruise missile strikes against SSRC's facility in Barsa. President Trump ordered the military to hit Syria's chemical weapons infrastructure. 59 Tomahawk missiles slammed into the Shayrat airbase where the attack aircraft had originated. The following year, in April 2018, after another chemical attack in Douma killed at least 40 people, American, British, and French forces launched coordinated strikes against 3 SSRC facilities, including the main research center in Barsa that was pulverized by over 70 cruise missiles. Aziz Asbar's name appeared on U.S. Treasury sanctions lists for his role in these programs. In April 2017, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin announced sanctions against 271 SSRC employees for supporting the regime's chemical weapons attacks. The statement was explicit. These sweeping sanctions target the Scientific Support Center for Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad's horrific chemical weapons attack on innocent civilian men, women, and children. But Asbar's work wasn't primarily about chemical weapons. That was Institute 5000's specialty. Asbar ran Institute 4000, which focused on missiles and rockets. His expertise was propulsion systems, guidance technology, and the engineering challenges of converting existing rocket designs into precision weapons. He oversaw the production of barrel bombs, the crude explosive-filled cylinders that Syrian helicopters dropped on rebel-held cities, killing indiscriminately. He supervised the development of the Birkin rocket, a massive unguided projectile filled with explosives that demolished entire buildings when it hit. But his most important work, the project that made him valuable to both Syria and Iran, was precision missile conversion, taking Syria's stockpile of short and medium-range rockets and retrofitting them with Iranian guidance systems to create weapons capable of hitting specific targets from long distances. That technology transfer required close coordination with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and specifically with the Quds Force, the IRGC's external operations wing commanded by Qassem Soleimani. Soleimani had recognized SSRC's potential early. After Syria's civil war erupted in 2011 and Western advisors and experts fled the country, Iranian IRGC officers moved in to fill the void. They brought technology, training, and funding. They established what analysts described as a collaborative platform comprising Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah, all working together at Masyaf facilities under Asbar's coordination. The Iranians wanted Syria to become a forward production base for precision missiles. Instead of manufacturing weapons in Iran and trying to smuggle them through Iraq and Syria into Lebanon, which exposed them to interdiction by Israeli airstrikes, they would build production facilities inside Syria and Lebanon. Shorter supply chains, lower detection risk, and plausible deniability, since the weapons would technically be Syrian or Lebanese rather than Iranian. Asbar was the key to making that vision reality. He had the technical knowledge to adapt Iranian designs to Syrian manufacturing capabilities. He had the political access to coordinate between Syrian military leadership and Iranian Quds Force officers. He had the institutional authority to allocate resources and manage the hundreds of personnel working on the programs. And crucially, he had Assad's trust, which meant he could operate with minimal interference even as the civil war raged across the country. Israeli intelligence had been watching him for years. Satellite imagery tracked construction at Masyaf facilities. Signals intelligence intercepted communications between Asbar's team and Iranian contacts. Human intelligence sources reported on his movements, his meetings, and his projects. The Israelis knew he was building something significant. They knew Iranian officers were deeply involved, and they knew that every month Asbar remained alive was another month closer to operational precision missile production inside Syria. They'd tried to stop him with airstrikes. September 2017, Israeli F-16S launched missiles at Masyaf, heavily damaging what was assessed to be a missile production building. It didn't stop Asbar. He rebuilt underground. December 2017, another strike. Asbar kept working. July 2018, Israeli jets hit Masyaf again. Asbar supervised repairs and continued production. The pattern was clear. Airstrikes could destroy facilities, but facilities could be rebuilt. The only way to permanently disrupt the program was to remove the irreplaceable human element, the scientist who made it all work. But first, they had to find a way to kill him. And that meant understanding his patterns, his vulnerabilities, and his fatal assumption that being important would keep him safe. The decision to target weapons scientists directly wasn't new. It was part of a pattern that had emerged over years of shadow warfare between Israel and its enemies. Between 2010 and 2012, at least 4 Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in attacks attributed to Israeli intelligence. Majid Shahriari, killed by a magnetic bomb attached to his car in Tehran. Mostafa Ahmadi Roshan, killed the same way while driving to work at the Natanz enrichment facility. Dariush Rezaeinejad, shot multiple times by motorcyclists while sitting in traffic with his wife and daughter. Fareydun Abbasi, an IRGC general and nuclear scientist who survived a similar attack when his wife saw the motorcyclists approaching and shouted a warning. The operations were precise, well-planned, and designed to eliminate specific individuals with minimal collateral damage. Iranian officials blamed Mossad and the CIA. Israeli officials declined to comment. But the message was clear. Work on Iran's nuclear program and you become a target regardless of where you live or how much security surrounds you. The same pattern applied to Hezbollah commanders. In February 2008, Imad Mughniyeh, Hezbollah's military chief, who'd been coordinating extensively with Qassem Soleimani, was killed by a car bomb in Damascus. The explosive device was hidden in the spare tire of a vehicle, detonated remotely when Mughniyeh walked past. 8 years later, in May 2016, Mustafa Badreddine, who'd replaced Mughniyeh, died under mysterious circumstances near Damascus airport. Hezbollah blamed rebel artillery. Others suggested internal Iranian revenge. The truth remains unclear, but the result was the same. Another irreplaceable commander eliminated. Now, in August 2018, intelligence reporting indicated Aziz Asbar's name had joined that list. According to an anonymous senior official from a Middle Eastern intelligence agency who spoke to the New York Times, Mossad had been tracking Asbar for years. The official described the car bombing as at least the 4th assassination mission by Israel in 3 years against an enemy weapons engineer on foreign soil. The pattern was consistent. Identify scientists whose work poses existential threats. Monitor their movements. Find vulnerabilities in their security. Execute precision strikes that eliminate the target while minimizing additional casualties. Asbar had apparently been on Mossad's kill list even before Syria's civil war began in 2011. But timing matters in intelligence operations. Killing him in 2010 might have triggered diplomatic backlash disproportionate to the benefit of removing one scientist when Syria's weapons programs were relatively contained. By 2018, the calculation had changed. Syria was in chaos. Iran was openly operating throughout the country. Russian military forces complicated Israeli air operations, and Asbar was on the verge of completing facilities that would make precision missile production unstoppable. The intelligence picture on Asbar came from multiple sources. Satellite surveillance provided imagery of Masyaf facilities showing construction of underground bunkers and production buildings. Analysts could see when new structures appeared, when vehicles moved between sites, and when activity levels suggested important operations were underway. But satellites couldn't reveal what was happening inside those buildings or who was directing the work. Signals intelligence filled some gaps. Communications between Asbar and Iranian contacts were likely monitored, though the level of detail remains classified. Modern encryption makes intercepting content difficult, but metadata about who's communicating with whom, how often, and from where can reveal operational patterns. If Asbar was regularly communicating with Quds Force officers in Tehran, that suggested active coordination on sensitive projects. Human intelligence was the hardest to develop, but potentially the most valuable. Did Mossad have assets inside SSRC or the Syrian military who could report on Asbar's activities? Intelligence services don't reveal such sources, but the detailed knowledge about Sector 4's activities and Asbar's role suggests either human sources or extremely sophisticated technical collection. Recruiting scientists or military officers in authoritarian regimes is extraordinarily difficult. The security services watch everyone, especially personnel working on weapons programs. But it's not impossible. One disillusioned employee, one person with access who disagrees with the regime's brutality, one officer who needs money for his family. Any of these could provide the intelligence that makes targeting possible. What's known is that Israeli intelligence built a detailed profile of Asbar over years of observation. They knew he directed Institute 4000. They knew he coordinated with Soleimani and other IRGC officers. They knew he was working on precision missile conversion using Iranian Fateh 110 technology. They knew he was building underground production facilities designed to survive airstrikes. And critically, they knew his patterns. Asbar lived in Masyaf rather than Damascus, unusual for someone of his importance. Most senior regime officials maintained homes in the capital's secured neighborhoods, but Asbar stayed close to his work, living near the facility he commanded. That meant regular, predictable movements between his home and Institute 4000. Short drives on familiar roads, routes that could be observed, mapped, and exploited. His security arrangements were inadequate for someone of his value. He'd apparently survived at least one previous assassination attempt, details of which were never publicly disclosed. That experience should have prompted enhanced protection. Armored vehicles, bodyguard convoys, varied routes, unpredictable timing. But Asbar continued moving with minimal security. Perhaps he believed the Syrian security services provided sufficient protection in Masyaf. Perhaps he thought the civil war chaos gave him cover. Perhaps he simply underestimated how determined his enemies were to kill him. That underestimation would prove fatal, because while Asbar was building missiles in Masyaf, someone was building a plan to kill him. The method would need to work in a war zone where Syrian, Iranian, Russian, and various rebel forces all operated. It would need to eliminate Asbar without causing a diplomatic crisis with Russia or triggering immediate retaliation from Iran. And it would need plausible deniability, a way to make the assassination look like something other than a foreign intelligence operation. On the night of August 4th, 2018, all the surveillance, all the planning, and all the preparation came together. Aziz Asbar left his home in Masyaf, got into his car with his driver, and started the engine. Somewhere, someone was waiting for exactly that moment. Saturday night, August 4th, 2018. Approximately 11:45 p.m. local time in Masyaf, Syria, Aziz Asbar's sedan pulled onto the road for what should have been a short routine drive to the Institute 4000 facility. The streets were quiet. Most of Masyaf's residents were home for the evening. The Syrian military checkpoints that controlled access to the area were familiar with Asbar's vehicle and movements. Nothing about the night seemed unusual or threatening. 20 seconds after leaving his home, the car exploded. The blast was massive and instantaneous. Witnesses described a fireball that illuminated the entire neighborhood, followed by the distinctive deep boom of high explosives detonating in a confined space. The force of the explosion completely destroyed the vehicle, killing both Asbar and his driver before they could react. Metal fragments scattered across the road. Windows in nearby buildings shattered from the overpressure. The car's frame was twisted beyond recognition. Syrian security forces arrived within minutes, sealing off the area and beginning their investigation. The attack had clearly been a car bomb, but the key question was how the explosives had been planted. Pro-government sources described it as a remote-controlled improvised explosive device, suggesting the bomb had been hidden in or under the vehicle and detonated by someone watching Asbar's movements. That would require surveillance, access to the car to plant the device, and technical expertise to build a bomb sophisticated enough to completely destroy an occupied vehicle. By Sunday morning, news of Asbar's death began spreading through Syrian and regional media. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a UK-based monitoring group with sources inside Syria, confirmed the killing and identified the victim as a senior SSRC official close to both Assad and Iranian leadership. Pro-government newspaper Al-Watan published reports acknowledging the death, but initially declined to identify Asbar by name, referring only to a senior scientist killed in Masyaf. That delay suggested Syrian authorities were still processing the security implications and deciding how to frame the incident publicly. Then came the first claim of responsibility. Within hours of the attack, a group calling itself the Abu Amara Brigades posted a statement on its Telegram channel. The message was direct. We planted explosive devices under the car of Aziz Asbar. The operation was successful. The criminal has been eliminated. Abu Amara Brigades was affiliated with Tahrir al-Sham, the dominant rebel faction in Idlib province, which itself had evolved from Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda. The group had previously claimed attacks against regime targets, including assassinations of military officers and bombings of government facilities. On the surface, their claim seemed plausible. Rebel groups operating in northwestern Syria had both motive and capability to target regime weapons scientists. Asbar's work on barrel bombs and missiles had contributed to thousands of civilian deaths. For rebels fighting Assad, killing him would be a significant victory. But almost immediately, Syrian government sources and intelligence analysts questioned the claim. Pro-regime media pointed to Israel as the more likely culprit. Syrian officials speaking anonymously to journalists suggested Mossad had conducted the operation and that the rebel group's claim was either a fabrication or a convenient cover story that suited everyone's purposes. The pattern fit previous Israeli operations perfectly. Precision targeting of a specific individual, minimal collateral damage, technical sophistication in bomb design and placement. And most tellingly, the timing and target selection aligned with Israel's strategic interests in preventing Iranian weapons development inside Syria. The most detailed reporting came from the New York Times, citing a senior official from a Middle Eastern intelligence agency who spoke on condition of anonymity. According to this source, Mossad had indeed carried out the assassination. The official described Asbar as heading a top-secret weapons research group known as Sector 4, operating as part of the Syrian Scientific Studies and Research Center. He had free access to the presidential palace in Damascus and had been collaborating with Major General Qassem Soleimani and other Iranians to begin production of precision-guided missiles in Syria. The source provided specific details that suggested deep intelligence access. Asbar was working to retrofit heavy Syrian SM-600 Tishreen rockets with Iranian guidance systems. He was building an underground weapons factory to replace facilities destroyed by Israeli airstrikes the previous year. He'd been under Mossad surveillance for an extended period, and his elimination was at least the fourth assassination mission by Israel in 3 years against enemy weapons and engineers on foreign soil. Other intelligence sources corroborated elements of the story. Israeli newspaper Haaretz cited security officials describing Asbar as a senior Syrian chemical weapons scientist and confirming the operation had eliminated a key figure in Syria's weapons programs. Defense analysts noted that Masyaf had been struck multiple times by Israeli airstrikes in recent years, most recently in July 2018, just 2 weeks before Asbar's death. The facility was clearly a priority target, and eliminating its director would be a logical next step after airstrikes had failed to permanently shut down operations. Iran's response was telling. Iranian media outlets, particularly those with ties to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, expressed outrage over the assassination. Mashrek News, considered close to the IRGC, described Asbar as a key factor in the resistance front's missile capabilities and mourned his loss as a blow to the axis, comprising Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah. That level of Iranian attention to a Syrian scientist's death suggested Asbar's value extended beyond Syrian interests to broader regional weapons development coordinated with Tehran. The funeral held for Asbar reflected his status, full military honors as befitting a brigadier general in the Syrian military. Hundreds of mourners marched through Masyaf, carrying posters of President Assad alongside photographs of the dead scientist. Hezbollah-affiliated media covered the funeral extensively, praising Asbar as a patriot and martyr who'd devoted his life to resistance against Israeli aggression. The ceremony was orchestrated to send a message that the regime valued its scientists and would avenge their deaths. But behind the public displays of mourning, Syrian security forces were scrambling to understand how the operation had succeeded. Asbar had been working in a secure area with Syrian military checkpoints throughout Masyaf. How had someone gained access to plant explosives in his vehicle? Was there an informant inside SSRC, or the security services who'd provided intelligence to enable the targeting? Had surveillance teams been operating in Masyaf undetected, mapping Asbar's routines and identifying vulnerabilities? The security failure was embarrassing and dangerous. If Mossad could kill Syria's top weapons scientist in a supposedly secure facility, who else was vulnerable? Iran shared those concerns. IRGC officers operating in Syria immediately reviewed their own security protocols. If Israeli intelligence could track and eliminate Asbar despite his close coordination with Quds Force personnel, then those same intelligence capabilities threatened Iranian officers throughout Syria. The assassination suggested Mossad had extensive collection capabilities inside Syria, possibly including human sources who could identify targets and report on their movements. Israel maintained its standard position of declining to comment on intelligence operations. No official confirmation or denial, no explanation of methods or justification, just silence, which in the intelligence world often speaks volumes. When Israel wants to send a message without claiming responsibility, the formula is simple. Conduct the operation with sufficient sophistication that informed observers understand who was responsible. Ensure multiple intelligence sources leak details to respected media outlets. Then decline to comment officially while letting the operation's success speak for itself. That approach provides plausible deniability while still achieving the deterrent effect. Other scientists working on enemy weapons programs understand their targets. Syrian and Iranian officials understand their security isn't adequate to protect key personnel. And allies understand Israel is willing to conduct high-risk operations to prevent weapons proliferation that threatens its security. The question of who actually planted the bomb remains officially unresolved. Did Mossad operatives infiltrate Masyaf, gain access to Asbar's vehicle, and place the explosive device themselves? That would require extraordinary operational security and significant risk of exposure. Did they recruit an asset inside Syrian security forces, or SSRC, who had access to Asbar's car and could plant the bomb on their behalf? That would provide better cover, but would rely on the asset's tradecraft and loyalty under pressure. Or did the Abu Amara brigades actually conduct the operation, either on their own initiative or after receiving intelligence about Asbar's routines from a foreign service? Rebel groups had carried out sophisticated attacks before. They had motivation to kill regime weapon scientists, and using a rebel group as the actual operational element while providing intelligence support would offer the best plausible deniability of all. The rebels claim credit publicly. Israel maintains silence. Iran and Syria suspect Israeli involvement but can't prove it. Everyone's narrative is maintained. That ambiguity serves intelligence operations well, but it raises harder questions about accountability and justification. If a rebel group killed Asbar, it's an act of war in an ongoing civil conflict. If a foreign intelligence service killed him, it's a targeted assassination on sovereign territory that raises questions under international law. The fact that we can't definitively answer who pushed the button matters less than understanding what the operation achieved and what it cost. I have to pause here and ask you something. Put yourself in the position of an intelligence analyst evaluating whether to recommend targeting Aziz Asbar. On one hand, he's building weapons designed to kill Israeli civilians. His precision missiles would give Iran and Hezbollah capabilities that could paralyze Israeli cities in the next war. He's a military officer working on weapons development for a regime that's used chemical weapons against its own people. On the other hand, he's a scientist, not a soldier. He earned his PhDs legitimately. He's not personally pulling triggers or launching missiles. He's working for his government, doing what governments everywhere ask their weapons scientists to do. Does his technical role make him a legitimate military target? Does killing him cross a moral line, or is it justified self-defense? If you were making that call, knowing people would die regardless of which choice you made, what would you decide? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this question about where we draw the line between civilian and combatant, between legitimate targeting and extrajudicial killing, isn't getting any easier in the age of precision weapons and targeted assassinations. Here's what happened after Aziz Asbar died. The explosion that killed Syria's top weapons scientist sent shockwaves far beyond the streets of Masyaf. Within days, it became clear this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a systematic campaign to prevent Iranian entrenchment in Syria and stop the proliferation of precision weapons that could threaten Israeli cities. Israel's approach to Syria since 2011 has been guided by what military planners call the campaign between wars doctrine. The concept is simple. Don't wait for a full-scale conflict to address threats. Use the space between major wars to conduct ongoing operations that degrade enemy capabilities, prevent weapons transfers, and maintain strategic deterrence. In practice, that's meant hundreds of airstrikes across Syria targeting Iranian weapon shipments, Hezbollah positions, and strategic facilities like SSRC installations. But Asbar's assassination represented something different. Airstrikes destroy facilities and weapon stockpiles. Assassinations eliminate human expertise that takes decades to develop. You can rebuild a bombed factory in months. Replacing a scientist with 2 PhDs and 20 years of institutional knowledge takes far longer, if it's even possible. The strikes on Masyaf continued after Asbar's death, confirming that eliminating him hadn't ended Israeli concern about the facilities he'd commanded. In December 2020, Israeli warplanes launched missiles from over the Mediterranean Sea that struck multiple targets near Masyaf. Syrian state media reported 14 dead and extensive damage to what it described as civilian areas. Western intelligence sources assessed the strikes hit missile production and storage facilities belonging to Iranian-backed militias. The operation destroyed 4 buildings identified as part of Institute 4000's expanded network. In August 2022, another major strike hit what Israeli intelligence believed was the main Institute 4000 site. Satellite imagery analyzed by independent researchers showed severe damage to large buildings consistent with missile production or storage facilities. The strike likely destroyed not just the structures, but also missile components and possibly complete weapons stored at the site, awaiting transfer to Hezbollah. March 2023 brought strikes on a site in the Wadi Ayoun area west of Masyaf, along the route connecting the facility to the coastal city of Tartus. The target was either a weapons convoy or another Institute 4000 installation, though precise battle damage assessment remained unclear. Additional strikes occurred in September 2023 and March 2024 near Hama and Aleppo, targeting SSRC facilities in both locations. Most recently, in September 2024, Israeli airstrikes killed at least 14 people and injured around 40 more in attacks on Sector 4 facilities. The pattern was unmistakable. 6 years after Asbar's death, the campaign to prevent Iranian missile production in Syria continued with undiminished intensity. But did eliminating Asbar actually achieve Israel's strategic objectives? The answer is complicated. Tactically, the operation was a clear success. A high-value target was eliminated with no Israeli casualties and manageable diplomatic fallout. The plausible deniability provided by the rebel group's claim gave Israel cover to avoid direct confrontation with Syria, Iran, or Russia. The technical expertise Asbar had accumulated over decades died with him in that explosion. No one could simply step into his role and continue his work without disruption. The immediate impact on Syrian-Iranian missile production was significant. Intelligence assessments suggested programs were set back by months, or possibly years. The coordination between Syrian facilities and Iranian technology providers became more difficult without Asbar's personal relationships and institutional knowledge. Scientists and engineers working on the programs had to adjust to new leadership with less experience and fewer connections to the various organizations involved. Strategically, though, the results are harder to measure. The missile production programs didn't stop. Other scientists stepped up to continue Asbar's work, though likely with less efficiency and coordination. Iranian IRGC officers took more direct control over operations at Masyaf and other facilities, which reduced Syrian autonomy but ensured the programs remained priority projects for Tehran. And the repeated Israeli strikes that followed suggested the threat hadn't been eliminated, just temporarily disrupted. There's also the question of unintended consequences. Killing Asbar created a martyr whose memory could inspire the next generation of Syrian weapons scientists. It demonstrated to Iranian leaders that their collaborative programs with Syria remained vulnerable, which might have driven them to move more operations underground or into facilities harder to target. And it established a precedent that scientists working on weapons programs in conflict zones are legitimate targets for assassination, a norm with implications that extend beyond the Middle East. The broader pattern is worth examining. Asbar's assassination was part of a sustained Israeli campaign against Iranian weapons development personnel that included operations in multiple countries over multiple years. In November 2020, just 2 years after Asbar's death, Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was killed in an ambush outside Tehran. The operation used a remote-controlled machine gun mounted in a pickup truck, fired via satellite link from operatives who weren't even in Iran. Fakhrizadeh had led Iran's nuclear weapons research program before it was officially disbanded, and intelligence services believed he continued coordinating related work in secret. That assassination, like Asbar's, was initially subject to conflicting claims. Iranian opposition groups suggested internal regime conflicts. Intelligence sources pointed to Mossad, the technical sophistication of the operation, the strategic timing just before a potential shift in U.S. policy under the incoming Biden administration, and the target selection all suggested state-level planning. In 2024, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert publicly acknowledged Israel's responsibility for the operation, breaking years of official silence. The Fakhrizadeh operation shared key characteristics with Asbar's assassination. precise targeting of a specific individual with unique expertise. Execution in a way that minimized collateral casualties. Initial ambiguity about responsibility followed by intelligence leaks that pointed to Mossad. And strategic timing designed to disrupt enemy weapons programs at critical moments. These operations reflect a calculated Israeli approach to preventing existential threats before they fully materialize. The doctrine holds that it's better to eliminate weapons development capabilities early, when the technology is still being perfected and key personnel can be identified and targeted, than to wait until mass production begins and the weapons are distributed to proxy forces. That means accepting the risks and consequences of conducting assassinations in foreign countries during peacetime or limited conflicts. But it also raises questions about where this approach leads. If targeting weapons scientists becomes normalized, do all researchers working on military programs in any country become potential assassination targets? Does it matter whether they're working for democracies or dictatorships, whether their weapons are offensive or defensive, whether they're developing nuclear capabilities or conventional missiles? The lines aren't as clear as we might want them to be. There's also the matter of reciprocity. Israel conducts these operations because it has the intelligence capabilities and operational reach to do so. But that doesn't mean other countries accept the precedent or won't attempt similar operations against Israeli or Western scientists if they develop the capability. Iran has attempted assassinations of Israeli officials and scientists abroad. Hezbollah has plotted attacks against Israeli targets worldwide. The shadow war isn't one-sided, and every operation that succeeds provides lessons and justification for the other side. For Syria and Iran, Asbar's death was a significant blow, but not a strategic defeat. The missile programs continued under new leadership. Iranian involvement deepened rather than retreated, and the infrastructure Asbar had been building, particularly the underground facilities designed to survive airstrikes, remained operational even if they weren't producing weapons at the rate he'd planned. For Israel, the assassination demonstrated reach and capability. It sent a message that no weapons scientist working on programs that threaten Israeli security is beyond targeting. It disrupted Syrian-Iranian coordination at a critical time when precision missile production might have become unstoppable. But it didn't end the threat, which means the operations, the strikes, the assassinations, and the shadow war all continue. The Russian dimension adds another layer of complexity. Russian military forces deployed to Syria in 2015 to support Assad's regime, establishing air bases and deploying sophisticated air defense systems throughout the country. Israel and Russia established deconfliction protocols to prevent accidental clashes when Israeli jets conducted strikes in Syria. The Russians generally tolerated Israeli operations targeting Iranian weapons facilities and Hezbollah positions, seeing those strikes as serving Russian interests by limiting Iranian influence that might compete with Moscow's own position in Syria. But the Asbar assassination tested those informal arrangements. If Mossad could conduct a car bombing in Masyaf without Russian objection or interference, it suggested Moscow either couldn't protect Syrian weapons scientists or chose not to. That raised questions about how much sovereignty Syria actually retained and whether Russian security guarantees to Assad were meaningful. The fact that similar operations continued after Asbar's death, including strikes on facilities near Russian military installations, suggested the deconfliction arrangements remained in place despite the expanded targeting. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this journey through one of the most revealing operations in the modern shadow war over weapons proliferation. This channel is dedicated to bringing you real intelligence operations every single day. These aren't sanitized Hollywood versions. These are actual missions with genuine tradecraft, real moral complexities, and consequences that shape our world. From targeted assassinations to covert nuclear programs, from spy rings that betrayed nations to operations that prevented wars, these stories reveal how intelligence agencies actually operate in the shadows. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, because the stories of modern espionage are still being written, and understanding how these operations work helps us understand the world we're living in. But before we finish, there's one more question worth asking. So, what do you think? Do targeted assassinations of weapons scientists cross a moral line that shouldn't be crossed? Or are they legitimate acts of self-defense against people building weapons designed to kill civilians? Is there a meaningful difference between killing a soldier on a battlefield and killing a scientist in a car on his way to work? Should international law treat weapons development as a military activity that makes scientists legitimate targets? Or should scientists be protected as civilians even when their work contributes to weapons programs? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and this question about where we draw lines in modern warfare doesn't have easy answers. The debate matters because the precedents being set now will shape how future conflicts are fought. On a quiet road in Masyaf on August 4th, 2018, a car bomb killed 2 men and sent a message that echoed across the Middle East. No facility is too secure, no weapons program is untouchable, and no scientist, regardless of how valuable, how educated, or how protected, is beyond reach. Whether the explosive device was planted by Syrian rebels seeking revenge against a regime weapons engineer, or by Mossad operatives conducting yet another precision assassination in enemy territory, the result was identical. Syria's most important weapons scientist was dead. Iran's missile production pipeline running through Syria was disrupted. The coordination between Syrian facilities and Iranian technology that Aziz Asbar had spent years building was fractured, and the next generation of scientists watching from the shadows had to decide whether they wanted to risk becoming the next target. Asbar had dedicated his life to building weapons for Syria's defense as he understood it. 2 PhDs from French universities, decades of research and development, rising to command the most sensitive weapons facility in Syria, direct access to presidents and generals, coordination with Iranian allies on projects designed to reshape the strategic balance. He'd survived one assassination attempt and continued his work undeterred, right up until the moment the explosives in his car detonated and killed him instantly. The underground weapons factory he was building was never completed to the specifications he'd planned. The precision missile production lines he was establishing took years longer to come online than his original timeline projected. The coordination between Syrian, Iranian, and Hezbollah forces became more difficult without his personal relationships bridging the different organizations. In purely operational terms, eliminating Aziz Asbar achieved meaningful disruption of weapons programs that threatened Israeli cities. But the programs didn't stop. Other scientists continued the work. Iranian IRGC officers ensured resources kept flowing. Facilities went deeper underground where satellites couldn't see them and bombs couldn't reach them. And the strikes, the intelligence operations, the targeted assassinations, they all continued as the shadow war ground forward with no end in sight. Because in the brutal arithmetic of covert warfare, killing one scientist doesn't end a weapons program any more than destroying one facility stops production. It removes a piece from the board, creates temporary disruption, and sends a message to everyone else involved. But someone always moves to fill the empty square. New scientists are recruited and trained. New facilities are built. And the cycle continues until one side achieves strategic victory or exhaustion forces both sides to accept an accommodation. Aziz Asbar spent years building missiles designed to strike Israeli cities with precision. Someone decided he'd built enough, and in the calculus that governed shadow wars, that meant he had to die. Whether that decision was justified depends on questions of law, morality, and strategic necessity that people still debate. What's not debatable is that the precedent has been set. Scientists who work on weapons programs for states considered hostile are now legitimate targets for assassination. The invisible line protecting civilians from targeted killing has shifted, and the shadow war that killed Aziz Asbar shows no signs of ending. If anything, it's only becoming more sophisticated, more lethal, and more accepted as the way modern conflicts are fought in the spaces between declared wars.